Hayes here.
Yeah, I saw that. I think he's gonna keep us in check.
All right, we're gonna open up this P and Z meeting at 4 o'clock. We'll go through approval of the minutes, and then we'll have some information presented before we get into the public hearing for everyone that is here that wishes to speak on the public hearing. First thing on the agenda is approval of the minutes from the March 2nd meeting. Does everyone review the minutes and have any questions or changes?
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes as presented.
We have a motion. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. All in favor? Raise your hand. All right. Those minutes are approved. We're going to get into the public hearing consideration and action on 3A. We have nothing on 2. So Drew, you're going to start, and we're going to let the applicant make a presentation, correct?
Yes, sir. This is an ordinance to annex into the cities and corporate city limits with the zoning classification. There is a slight modification here. We've simplified it. They're only requesting R2, R3, and C3. This is all of a certain tract of parcel of land comprising of 263.28 acres out of the original patent survey of Kerr County, Texas, comprising of 116.24 acres out of the William Watt survey number 66, abstract 365, and 147.04 acres out of the David Chashard survey number 67, abstract 299, more or less commonly known as 2650 Bandera Highway. With that, I will turn it over to the applicant.
Good afternoon, members of the commission. Thanks for allowing us to come before you. I'm here representing the applicant, who's Rosemary Meek Romero, and then Rosemary Meek Hunt Ranch LP, the owners of the property, and as you've seen in your packet, requesting annexation and the change of the zoning that we've got on the map before you right now. And I'm here it's pretty straightforward, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
I think what we'll do, Gary, is we'll open the public hearing.
Sure.
And then we'll let everyone speak, and then we'll close the public hearing, and then we'll have
Call me back up.
questions from us. During the public hearing, if there are questions, we can have them addressed at that time.
That'd be great.
Is that okay, Drew?
That's fine with me. Thank y'all.
So are you ready, Drew?
Yes, sir. So again, this property is requesting R2, R3, and C3. The adjacent, or this is part of Strategic Catalyst Area 10, which is along 173 in the river frontage. Is designated as agriculture and outdoor tourism. Stemming from the 2008 comprehensive plan, that agriculture and outdoor tourism was a placeholder for some of these large ranch tracts that did not have specific studies done with the 2008 comprehensive plan. And the Kerrville 2050 plan focused on the catalyst areas, so those areas were left as agriculture and outdoor tourism. Based on the adjacent development and the development trends in this area, the request, it would be consistent if we changed the future land use plan to neighborhood residential. So staff is recommending that amendment as well. The strategic catalyst area includes rural living, estate, residential, and professional services. So this request would be consistent with that. The adjacent zoning to the north, of course, the adjacent property is outside the city limits, and then you have Kerrville Shriner Park, which is public and institutional. To the south is Comanche Trace, and this portion is zoned planned development district for the neighborhood and golf course. And here's the layout again. That front portion, let me get my pointer here. Wrong one, give me just a second. This tract is C3 along the frontage of 173. The tract south of that, adjacent to the quarry, would be R3. The balance of the property, except the hill, the large hill in the middle, balance of the property be R2. There is a large hill with the current homestead on top of that. They're requesting C3. And then this cutout piece across 173 on the river frontage, also requesting R3.
Question on the C2 that went away, was that the 5.5 acres?
No, they were working through different layouts when they made their initial application.
Oh,
So they removed the R1 and the C2 request entirely.
okay.
Obviously, this is fronting along Highway 173. The thoroughfare plan also identifies a primary arterial from 173 to Highway 16. As this and the adjacent property develop, that'll need to be taken into account. That arterial will be addressed through the plating and subdivision process. As far as it impacts on traffic, with this property fronting as TxDOT highway, it is required to go through the traffic impact analysis with TxDOT. Any improvements required to mitigate the traffic concerns based on the development, they'll be required to make those improvements along the highway, whether that be deceleration lanes or turn lanes and so on. Those will be requirements with TxDOT for their intersections and
It'll be
approval.
requirements for the developer.
That's correct.
So, anybody else have any questions before we get into this? What I'd like to do, for you to do, Drew, before we go into the public hearing, is to go through each zoning classification they're requesting and give us an idea of what is allowed in those zoning classifications.
Absolutely. So starting with C3, which is both that frontage tract and the hilltop, that's general commercial. So that would allow any of your commercial uses, obviously based on size of the property and so on. But that's more of your local and regional commercial uses.
Is that like retail,
Mm-hmm.
restaurant, office?
Retail, restaurant, service, office, yes, sir. The R3, the Riverside lot, and this 36 acres along the property line with the gravel quarry is multifamily. That would be apartments or condominiums. And then R2 allows for a variety of housing types, single family with accessory dwelling unit, townhomes, and duplexes. Any other questions?
I think that covers it for me. Anybody else?
That's good.
So we will open up a public hearing at 4:07 on the question at hand, and we do have a few speakers. We'll let the speakers speak, and then we'll get to the questions. And the first speaker I have here is Barb Duell, Ferguson.
Gentlemen, thank you. My first question after arriving here today is that one of the designations that the neighbors were notified of, in the notification that went out to adjacent homeowners, it referred to designations of R1, 2, 3, and commercial. Now the R1 has been totally removed from this request. I would submit that there needs to be a new notification sent out to all the neighbors in adjacent property with the correct designations, because eliminating R1 is eliminating the homes that would be of like kind along those bordering properties. Now, what they'll be putting along those bordering properties are not like kind. They are much smaller homes than what currently exists there. So I think that the board needs to re-notify, the city needs to re-notify all the adjacent property owners with the correct designations of what's being asked for here. Thank you.
That is a question, because with the notice that was sent out to everyone within 200 feet, now, I don't know if it designated where the R1 was gonna be.
It did not. So they simplified the request, so it is still a legal notification. They are still requesting R2, R3, and C3, all of which were notified.
So, Barb, I understand your request, but I think even if they had requested R1, it wasn't designated where it could be, and the R2 could still be in the areas where you're talking about. And I don't know if that, I mean, really, maybe we need to ask Mike about this. This could be more of a legal question than it is.
I agree with Mr. Paxton. You're not increasing the use at all, and by removing it, it's still fair notice.
Well, I might disagree that we did change the request from the applicant. Again, I think within the property, it might not change anything because the R1 could have been, you know, on the other side of the rock pit or wherever. So you still could have had the same type of housing, but you know, I'm gonna have to defer to Mike. If this is still a legal notice, then we're gonna move on. All right, we're gonna go to Fred Heineke.
Thank you all. Fred Henneke, 2595 Bandera Highway. Before my comments, I'd like to get a clarification from Mr. Braxton. I didn't understand where the arterial is going from 172 to 16. Is it going on this property or the adjacent property?
My understanding is, and Drew can answer this, part of it will go on, you can't go, it would have to be this property when it's developed to the back of the property line. And then if and when the property behind it gets developed, it would go through that property as well. Location of where that's gonna be, I have a question of that as well once we get through the public hearing, but yeah, it will be within this property somewhere to the point of where the property ends, and then it'll be there dead-ended until, I'm assuming, the property behind it gets developed. Is that correct, Drew?
That's right.
One of the
The
reasons
third-
I raised the question is when the property, the Keeble property, which is between the Meek Ranch and the state park was under consideration, the arterial was going on that property.
Well, that
Because
was
it does go all the way to 16.
that was the initial, but when the thing was finalized, what was decided or what was modified on that was, that's true, but it was, the thoroughfare was changed. The thoroughfare was gonna go right on the west property line between Keeble's property and the Meek property. So they were going to do half of it, and the other half, up to where the property ends, when the Meek property was developed, they were gonna be responsible for the other half. So it was going to be on both properties for the front half. And then it was gonna continue on Keeble's property all the way through. So that is true, but it wasn't all on Keeble's property. It was changed, and it was, you know, like right along the property line there, on the east property line of Keeble and the west property line of Meek, where they abut, that's where it was gonna be.
There were some questions raised at the time as to how the city could encumber the Meek property that way, but that's not what we're here for today. I just wanted a clarification as to where that arterial was going to go. A little background, I've been enjoying the Meek Ranch since 1973, when I married Carl Meek's daughter, Rosemary Meek's stepdaughter. Many memories. I mourn the loss of that property to development, but it's inevitable, so here we go. I own a house at 2595 Bandera Highway. I bought it from Mrs. Meek in 2005. My concern with this development, as I expressed with the Keeble development, is twofold, really: water and traffic. Other people will speak to water. I want to talk about traffic. About 5 years ago, I was rear-ended on 173 trying to turn into my driveway. The traffic hasn't gotten any better since then, I guarantee. The city was able to negotiate a 5-mile-an-hour decrease in the speed limit from the other side of Comanche Trace to the state park. In my humble opinion, that's had a negligible effect on the traffic there. those of us who live on the riverside and have driveways that open out onto 173 are very concerned about the increase in traffic. There are times now when it takes 5, 7 minutes at the least to get out of my driveway because of the traffic. Traffic of people coming into work, the traffic of people going to school. It doesn't get any better. And then in the evening, you have the same problem with people going home from work and people going home from school. As the city works with the developer on this project, I think you must take into consideration the needs of the people who are already there. Yes, we don't live in the city, but we still have to be recognized. We have rights along that line.
Keep going, go ahead.
Okay. So, and the configuration that you've explained here, where the small tract, well, I call it small, the tract that borders on 173 is going to be used for commercial property. Well, what does that mean? It means you can have people coming in and out more frequently than if they were going to school and returning, or they were going to work and back. You can have a parking lot there, which means people are going to come in and go out. Parking lot is going to be right across from my house, directly across from my driveway. Now, what measures can be taken to protect us, me? I know it's a state highway. You're going to have to work with TxDOT. But there's got to be some consideration taken into for the people who live on the riverside, people who've lived there for a long time. I mean, I'm only there 18 years. I'm one of the newcomers. So I need to be able to get in and out of my driveway safely. I need to have the ability to use my property safely. So as the city works with the developer, and I don't oppose the annexation because it's inevitable, I mourn it because it's been a source of great joy and refuge for me for years. When I first had my heart problems, Carl and Rosemary brought me back from the hospital in San Antonio to the ranch, even though I wasn't living there, and I wasn't married to their daughter anymore, to recover. So I have a lot of emotional impact with this. But even beyond that, I live where I live, and I'm going to stay there as long as I can. And so I implore you to think logically and in advance as to how you're going to manage the traffic, obviously with TxDOT, because the Keeble property is going to go eventually.
Well, I know that you've run over your time, but let me just address your concerns and how they need to be handled, because we only have one issue here that we're considering, and the consideration we have here is the only issue we have here is the annexation and the zoning, and that's all we're dealing with today. Now, if in fact we make a recommendation, no matter whether we recommend for this or against this, it's going to city council. There'll be 2 public hearings, and you'll have an opportunity to stress upon the city, and I don't disagree with you. I mean, there's a lot of changes that this can, especially to the people that live on the river, and that would be your opportunity in those public hearings to basically say what you've said here, and then through the whole development process, because it gets annexed, it gets zoned, that's just the very beginning, and then there's a process of design, there's a process of a traffic study, water capacity study, all those things that have to be done before the development can, and that all goes through the city's planning and services, and all through that process, and I agree with you, I think there has to be some pretty substantial discussions made about how it impacts the people that live there already. And I agree with what you're saying. I just, at this, where we are today, we only have, one issue to deal with, and that's the annexation zoning. And so, once we're done with this today, and it goes to city council, there'll be 2 public hearings. If it, like I say, whether we approve it or deny it, it's still going to city council. And then there'll be a lot of time in this process to deal with, hopefully, successfully with what you're talking about.
Well, thank you. I understand that this is annexation. As I
Yes, sir.
said already, I don't oppose it, I mourn it.
No, I understand.
I also understand that the zoning that are part of the hearing today are just, they could be anywhere on this property. I mean, Mr. Paxton has laid out where they would most likely be, apartments here and commercial here. But I think as part of the zoning and the planning development we're gonna have some discussions about where those designations should rightfully be.
Correction, these are the designations, they cannot change them.
They can't move, they can't, if we approve this and something is C3 and something is R2 and R3 where it's placed, and they don't have they can't move it.
They'll have to go,
They can request,
they'd have to go back through this process.
they'd have to go back through this
With-
process completely.
With
so.
all due respect, what we were provided from the city has no indication as to where those zoning requirements would be placed. It simply says zoning classifications of R1, R2, or et cetera. It doesn't say C2 is gonna be here,
You are
C3 is gonna be
correct.
here.
That is correct, and that letter was sent out, and then, you're looking at the map. of
So,
where-
but the map doesn't say what the designations
Oh,
are.
sure it does.
Hmm?
Yeah, if you look at up there, it tells you.
Well,
each
the map
specific-
that I have, which came with the
Oh, no,
letter,
no,
doesn't.
there's a, you wanna put this up?
It's on the screen.
We didn't get that. Here's what we got, which doesn't tell me there's gonna be commercial right across from my house. It says there could be commercial somewhere in the property. And so if the designations that have been given to us for the first time this evening are now laid in stone, then I don't think that's fair. I don't think that's fair, that without warning and without an understanding of where these zonings are gonna be placed, you go ahead and place them.
We didn't place them, this is what they've requested.
Well, but you all are by virtue, I believe you said that today is to approve the zoning and the annexation and the zoning where is indicated by Mr. Paxton.
That's what's in front of us, yes.
Well, again, I'm saying to you that nobody told me, and I don't think anybody else, where those zonings were going to be applied. I did not know, coming here tonight, that the commercial was going to be across the street, across the highway from my house. I didn't know that the apartments were gonna be by the quarry, which is a good place for it, but I didn't know that. I didn't know what use they were gonna make of the hill. I mean, there's a difference between saying this 269 acres can have zoning of R2, R3, whatever, C2 and C3, and saying this property is going to have C2 here, C3 here, and C2 here, and R2 here, because that has never been presented to we, the public, who I believe have a right to get that information if it's a part of this hearing.
Okay, thank you. Okay, our next speaker is Michael Ross.
Seems like I was here a year ago to talk about another development. I live right, for those of you who don't, I'm right here. So I'm kind of at the corner where the Meeks property and the Keeble property come together. And honestly, for my house, it's not gonna be that big of a deal. I got a big lot, and I'm gonna miss all the cows on the other side of the fence because they make really good neighbors. I don't miss them a lot. They're beautiful animals. My big issues coming in are water, traffic, noise, light. One question I've got for Drew is, you talked about R2 and R3, and I understand that. Could you talk about what R1 is? And because they dropped that off, and they had C2 and C3, and now it's just C3. What's the difference between C2 and C3, and what's the difference between R1 and R2?
R1 is single family only, R2 allows for the variety of housing types.
What's the typical density for R1 or R2?
That depends on how the developer lays it out, so.
Okay, and C2 versus C3? Because I'm assuming C3 means bigger, taller.
Right, C3 allows for more commercial uses, C2 is more of your local neighborhood commercial, and C3 adds what we refer to as regional commercial components.
Okay. Those are my comments and questions.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Carolyn Young?
I am Carolyn Young, and I live at 2745 Bandera Highway. And I think there's been a little bit of a mix-up because I did not receive this letter. And I live extremely close to this property. I got this copy from my neighbor. And I hope that in the future I would get mailings of anything else that's pertinent to this. I very much oppose this because of the water. We're not going to get any more. The traffic, and I really don't like R3 and C3 designations that close to my home. Very simple.
Is this Judith Vinson?
I also reside at Cypress Landing, where Carolyn Young does. Some of my questions have already been expressed, but I very much oppose this. I think we need to know, not in numbers of C3, C1, whatever, we need to know what is proposed to be built there. Are you considering the hotel, or will the developer consider that? Is it going to be big apartments, buildings? How many people are going to live there? How it's going to affect our lives? I agree with the other gentleman. It is very dangerous to come in and out of our property right now. The traffic, I've lived here since 1996, and the traffic has increased so many times that I couldn't even measure it. There was hardly any traffic on that highway. With the development of Comanche Trace and all the things out there, we have that. That's progress. But now you're talking about something that is so much more than all this to put in there. And in my opinion, it's too much, too soon. We need to keep up with this, with the schools, with the water, with everything than the highway. That highway would have to be widened, and there would have to be traffic lights and things that we don't have now. For it already, there have been fatalities on that highway and lots of accidents. And it's when we come out of our driveway, we're just taking our life into our hands really right now, because the traffic just comes flying the other way from town. And when we come back from town, they're on our bumper driving fast, and it's just really bad. And this is our only way to go to town, and you have to consider that. We've been there a long time. This is going to affect our lives very much, and I think we need more information than you're putting out. And I do oppose this very much.
Well, and I understand, I live in Comanche Trace, and sometimes I wait 5 or 6 minutes to get out as well. And my understanding of the process is, as I said before, we have only one question in front of us, but once this is done, there are a lot of questions, traffic studies and water studies and capacity and things like that have to be done before there could ever be any development. So these are all valid points. I agree with you. This is a very smaller, less dense development than Comanche Trace is, and Comanche Trace still has a substantial amount of development to go. So, but you know, as this passes this first phase, where they're not really required to tell us how many houses they're going to build, they're given an outside limit, but that'll be in the next phase. So hopefully we'll get much more questions answered at that point. Carl Meek.
Hi, I'm Carl Meek, a lifelong resident of Kerrville, and this was my dad, and now is my stepmother's ranch that you're addressing here. And I have a few questions here. And Mike, you did a good job there. Probably I'm premature in these questions, but I'd like to know who the developer is. I'd like to know what their plans are, what developments they've done in other places, and what can be done zoning-wise to protect the neighbors. And is there a presentation that is made? Can y'all identify who the developer is or anything like that?
That's a question I'd like to know too, Carl, but that's up to the, at this point, we're not dealing with really the developers, we're only dealing with the applicant, which is Mrs. Meek's representative, so. I've asked that question already, and there is no answer to that right now.
Well, maybe Gary, or both of y'all, or just Gary? Part of this.
Once we get through the public hearing, I'll
Make a presentation?
take the podium.
Okay, thank you all.
Thanks, Carl. Al Cox.
It's right over there, show the microphone.
I'll use the podium. That's okay with you.
It's not, you just.
Oh, it's
use the
not
one over there, yes, sir.
Well, it's just a whole lot easier to lay my clipboard down.
Oh. Well,
I think
Mike, I
so.
don't wanna step on that.
I think it's okay, Carl, if you want to use the podium, if you got a clipboard, go ahead.
My apologies there, sir.
Well, I'll start off way over here. Thank the commission for allowing me to speak today. My name's Al Cox. I live at 2651 Bandera Highway, which is directly across the street from the property in question. I've lived there for 23 years. It's been a very nice pastoral site across the street, and I've enjoyed it and still enjoy. While I do not totally oppose the annexation of the property, excuse me, I'm a little nervous today. The proposal is written with, and again, these notes are based on what we received. R3, C2, and C3, due to the existing dwellings between 173 and the river, would be mostly classed R1 and R2. The R3 zoning next to my house and also the C across the street would be totally inadequate. The purpose of zoning is to separate land used to reduce friction between adjacent properties and protect property investors from having their investment being devalued. Face it, most of us who own our own property do not wish to live next door to a bar, dance hall, due to the late hour traffic, noise, etc. associated with such a business. Many of the uses within the classifications may be perfectly acceptable, but others would not. So I suggest the zoning board restrict to R1 and R2 only, and if the developer wishes to apply for zoning change in the future for a specific planned use, then it should be weighed in at that appropriate at that time. Since the property is landlocked, again, information we weren't furnished, the only access is Highway 173. If the land is allowed to be multifamily and high-density forms of housing, the vehicular traffic would only be multiplied onto what has already become an issue. Since there is little information included in this petition as to actual land use, the city should be suspect as the adjacent landowners as to what their intent to this property is. Since we all know there are good developers and bad, we only wish to maximize, who only want to maximize profit without regard to the consequences of the adjoining neighborhood. The land of the cowboy, not the Viking. We do not need developers who only wish to pillage and plunder our land. Therefore, my request is that they reject this petition in its entirety. Thank you.
Okay, I don't have any others. Go ahead.
Do you have questions?
No, sir, I'm good, thank you.
Mr. Siegerman?
No, I have no other speakers signed up. Was there anyone before I close the public hearing that wanted to speak?
Just a quick question.
Sure, yes, sir.
Given the fact that the notification was not apparently complete to those of us that received it, would the attorney like to address that concern, the legality of that?
I don't have the statute in front of me, but all it requires is notice of the date, time, location of the public hearing, and what the request is for the zoning. That's it. Doesn't have to have a map in it, doesn't have to pinpoint exact areas where the zoning occurs. I believe, and I haven't seen the notice in the paper, nor have I seen the notice that went out to them, but based on what I have seen in the past and what's been referenced here today, I think it was legal notice.
Is there any concern about two zoning changes that would?
No, I mean, you're not increasing the what's the term? You're not increasing the intensity of the use, and that's really the term. You've dropped off R1, but you're still talking about the rest of the residential classifications.
Well, but you went from C2 to C3, is that correct, Drew? You had no C3s in the notice?
C3 was in the notice.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay,
So
C3 was in the notice.
everything they're requesting was in the notice.
okay.
We are not adding anything
You're just
additional
taking
to
something
the
out.
notice, correct. And the purpose of the notice is to provide the information here at the meeting, which is where we obviously go into more detail.
Yes, sir?
Is it accurate then to say that if this, as presented, passes, then right across from my house is gonna be a commercial property, even though I had no notice of that?
And next door.
No, well, I guess technically speaking, you didn't know where the commercial was gonna be, but it was in the notice that there was commercial property.
That there was commercial
Yes, sir.
property somewhere. It could be in the back, it could be the house, make it a nice restaurant. It could be next to the quarry. But what was presented said, no, it's gonna be here. So, I'm just asking, does the city's presentation saying that the commercial property will be here and the apartments will here, is that the zoning? Have you now made a zoning designation on those tracks and that configuration?
You've got in front of us what they've requested and where.
Can you
We
put
don't
that
have
back up,
that.
please? Sorry.
Ma'am?
Can that, zoning map go back up?
Sure.
Thank you so much.
There it is.
But we don't have it. We don't have it. We didn't come here today knowing that commercial property was going in that particular part of the property. And so how can you expect us to adhere or to respect this process when you're throwing things into it that were not provided to us?
I'm gonna let the city attorney address that.
I mean, I'll go back to what I said earlier. We provided legal notice. This is exactly the purpose of this public hearing, Mr. Henneke. They have an interest in this zoning, and they're here to express their opinions. We provided notice that this parcel was going to include, all the districts and the uses that were within those districts. Planning and Zoning Commission's role now is to consider those zoning classifications and make a report to council, either, that they could approve all of it, they could disapprove all of it, or make a negative recommendation, or they could alter it in some form or fashion. But that's exactly why they're having a public hearing, is for folks like you to weigh in and say you have a concern for X, Y, and Z, or you support X, Y, and Z.
My point, Mike, though, is that I don't object to their laying out the possible zoning classifications. But my strong objection is to them placing those zoning designations on parts of the property when we, the public, had no notice of those designations, those binding designations.
Right, and again, they're not binding anything. This has to go to council in the form of an ordinance that will include a first reading and a public hearing, and that's the law. And going back to that, what you all have been provided in notice and what went into the newspaper was the legal notice that we're charged with providing pursuant to state law and our zoning code.
My understanding from what I've heard is that the commercial property is going in that part right across from my house.
Okay.
Period. Not that there is some commercial property on this 269 acres. There's a major difference in us being able to express our opinion when we don't have that detail of information.
Well,
Nobody said there's a problem with the designations broadly. But when you bring it down to, they're gonna go here and here and here, then that has a bigger impact upon we, the adjacent landowners, than the broad designations without any specification.
I totally agree with you, but let me ask you a question. Had you been provided that the commercial zoning was gonna be where it is, across the street from you, you would be here expressing your same dissatisfaction, am I correct?
No, I would have been here and saying, I oppose the annexation. I did not oppose the annexation. I warned it, but if you had told me that there's gonna be a strip center right across from my house, darn right I would have been here opposing it.
And I understand, and that's your right, and you can, you know, since you've gotten here, you have discovered that, you have the right to oppose it. And I understand that. I'm not trying to justify the way the notice was sent. I can only say that when the notice was sent out, and I'm not chastising you or not chastising anyone here, but when that notice was sent out, if you have concerns, you can, as I did, because when I didn't get the notice, but I saw the sign out there, and so I immediately went in and requested the information of where this zoning was gonna be, and that's how I found out about it. So again, I understand your frustration, Fred, trust me, I'm not happy about the change in zoning and things like that, but at this point, if I was to say, listen, we're gonna, let's you know, postpone this and let's have this next month, we would be having the same questions, the same concerns, and we would be in the same situation only a month down the road, and it would take a lot longer for the city to have the public hearings where all the citizens can go in and express their, you know, whatever they wanna do, so.
I don't want to beat a horse to death, but what I don't understand is how the developer, it's not the owner talking, it's the developer, and the city can say, you're gonna build a strip center here, across from my house, without telling me that that's gonna be part of the public hearing. And that's what you've done.
I can only defer to what the city attorney said. That's not what I've done.
Well,
We're here to listen to the issue.
Someone answered my question that yes, those designations are gonna be right where he said they were. Somebody answered my question to that extent.
That's correct.
So somebody took that position, even though it's not part of what I got. I just don't understand, I don't see any equity in assigning zoning designations to parcels without providing that information to the public in time for the public hearing. Because the first time any of us knew about where there was going to be the apartments and where there was going to be commercial was right here,
Understand?
now, just earlier. That's not fair.
I believe the notice that went out did its job because you are here being able to speak your mind and see what's on the board now.
The notice gave me, I'm going to talk about me, notice that it was going to be annexed and that the property was going to have possibly these zoning characteristics, zoning designations. It did not tell me where they were going to be. Because where they're going to be makes a major difference. Just then there might be somewhere. Because the use, I mean, like I said, you're gonna build a strip center right across from my house.
I don't know what's gonna be built there, Fred.
Well, it's commercial. I
It's
mean,
commercial, that doesn't mean it's gonna be a strip center, but I don't know. And again, I'm gonna go back to where I said in the very beginning, I understand your frustration, but that is not in this commission's purview to discuss where the zoning is gonna be and what's gonna be built there.
But I'm sorry, I'm just gonna ask one more time. By passing this ordinance, sending it on to the city, are you recommending to the city council that the parcel directly across from my house be commercial and that the apartments be next to the quarry? Are you recommending, by passing what you're doing tonight, sending it to the city council, are you saying to the city council, there's gonna be a commercial parcel here, there's gonna be apartment parcel here? Or are you simply saying they're gonna be different designations throughout the property?
We're gonna make a decision based on what was presented to us. It's just, that's all we have. We can turn it down, or we can approve it, or we can recommend some changes to it. That's our options.
And it's per the map that's on the screen right now. Those are the designations.
But I don't know those designations.
They're right in front of you, sir.
I didn't get those designations.
Chairman, if I may.
See what I got? It's right here.
The state law requires a notice of public hearing. This is the public hearing where the information is presented to the public. That is due process. That is why we're here tonight, same as any other zone case.
I think I might be able to address something that's being discussed.
Please step to the microphone if you're going to speak.
In doing my homework, which I do homework, I printed out the city's zoning land use. And I green check marked every use that would be available under those three. It would have been a lot easier to mark what's not on there.
Yes, sir.
I mean, when I said dance hall and bar, that was in this list. So if they want to build HEB number 3 across the street, we have no say so. Granted, the city would have to approve such a structure, but we're not kidding. They could put Gravity Check across the street from us, and that's just not right. It's not respecting our ownership. Thank you.
Bet. Yes, sir. Dr. Crockett?
My name is Michael Grocke. I'm a resident of Comanche Trace. My concerns on this are many, but the basis being that anything outside of a designation of R1 or R2 really doesn't fit any of the ancillary properties that have been developed. Comanche Trace has a small amount of commercial, I guess, up at the golf center there. But to put in the middle of this area C3 designation, I don't think is correct outside of possibly a restaurant type designation. Regardless, curious to see what the developer, how forthwith they'll be with their presentation and their disclosure of other properties that they've done. I think if they were withholding of information in that regards, I think that would need to play into the council's decision of what to allow this or not. But in the end, I believe anything outside of a request for R1 or R2 just doesn't fit this location. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
I wasn't on the original list, but I have a question. I'm Casey
What's your
Jan.
name? Okay.
Casey Jans. I'm the Board of Realtors president in Kerrville, and this may be way ahead of schedule, but when Comanche Trace was developed, was there large enough water and sewer lines to accommodate the potential development of this property, assuming, there's 400 houses or a giant apartment complex or whatever the case may be to suffice this, or would we have to undergo major development of new water and sewer lines to accommodate whatever gets approved?
The lines to Comanche Trace were upsized for more than just Comanche Trace, but I don't know that it's going to be enough to facilitate this. That would be at the developer's expense to do some engineering study on what capacity and to make any upgrades necessary is at the developer's cost.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Barb.
Thank you. I am concerned, like Mr. Haneke is, that proper notice was not given to people. This was the notice that was sent out. It says in it that state law and local ordinance require notification to property owners within 200 feet of the subject property. They're saying notification of the public hearing, which outlines what the parcel is. If you folks today were going to approve this map, we'd be good. But you're not approving this map that the owners were sent. You're approving this map. The owners were not sent. And therein lies the problem. This would not be sufficient for your approval. I know it wouldn't, because there's no designation of where the things lie. You would never approve this for R1, 2, 3, and commercial. This can be approved. So the property owners were not given sufficient notice of what you would be asking to approve. And like a lot of the other people who've spoken, I have real concerns about this, but I know right now your focus is the zoning request. But property owners deserve, by state law, to be properly notified of what you are going to be approving. They were not, and I request that you table this, send out proper notice, and then move forward. And thank you.
Anybody else before I close the public hearing? All right, we're closing the public hearing at 4:50. You have, Gary, did you want to elaborate?
I'm happy to answer any questions.
Does
I can. Members of the commission, we certainly hear those concerns. That's just, we're at the stage, I'm representing the owner, not the developer, in requests for the annexation and the zoning changes, which is part of our contractual requirements that we have to do if we move forward with the possible upcoming sale or potential sale of the property. So that's really, we're going through the steps. We know there's many, many, many more steps following this.
So Gary, are the zoning requests coming from the developer that you have on this?
Yes.
So this is what they requested?
Certainly.
Anybody else?
Are there any thoughts as to what that commercial is going to look like even yet? Or do you even know that?
I cannot answer that. I'm not part of the development process. Again, I'm representing the landowner.
Right. No, I understood that, but I didn't know if there had been any conversations that gave any direction, so.
My inclination is that it's going to be extremely high-end. It's not strip centers. But again, I am not the developer. I'm not representing the developer here today. I've not seen any drawings, and I don't think because of they can't actually begin the full development process until they get the zoning approved, and then they know what their densities are, and that'll be the next phase down the road when we work with or when they work with the city on the development plan. I'm not trying to be vague.
Oh, no.
I simply don't have that answer.
Just a question.
Carl, did you have a question?
Yes, I did. I have a suggestion for everybody. I was hoping to have a developer representative at this meeting who could answer all of our questions about this project. And I don't have a dog in the hunt on this thing. I just, want it handled properly. I think it might be very useful if the P&Z requested a full presentation by the developer of what the plans are, some history of their company, what they've done, and then the P&Z, then you have, table today's open meeting, and people have a chance to come in and ask the developer, see the presentations, and then P&Z, after getting the citizens' input, could make an informed decision about how to protect the neighbors. Thank you.
Anyone else?
I do. Gary, can you just tell me, or tell us, please, was there a reason we dropped R1 and C2?
John, can you help me with that?
Just to provide more flexibility, just in case they wanted duplexes or townhomes in that area.
Thank you.
By passing this, you're saying any R3 use is there. No matter what the developer comes in and tells us, if it ain't on paper, it don't exist. So if he wants to put gravity check across the street, if it's R3.
You're talking about C3, not R3, correct?
I'm talking about the C3 usage. C3 allows anything that's in C2. And same way with R3 on the river. I don't think that's a very adequate use, especially since there is no C3 over there now.
That's not C3, that's R3 on the river.
I guess from the applicant standpoint, we feel like we have met all the.
Step up to the mic, please.
Excuse me?
Step up to the mic so we can hear what you're saying.
Just from the applicant standpoint, we feel like we've met the requirements We've done what the city has requested us to do and provided that information to them. We follow the procedures.
You have, I agree with you.
And so we would like for you to consider passing this tonight.
Thanks, Gary, I appreciate it.
Sure.
Before we get into this, any comments or anything from anybody?
I'm just a little concerned, Mike, with the change of zonings.
As am I.
That, I mean, we're presenting one thing and then it's changed. That's one of my concerns that I have with it.
Anybody else?
C3 is certainly a concern.
That's a big concern for me.
Yeah.
I just, and I don't know, Gary was gracious enough to give me some information on this property, location-wise, and for people that are living in Comanche Trace, where Dr. Ross lives in the back there, that property back there that is really the only property that abuts Comanche Trace is limited by drainage, flood drainage easement that comes down the east side of that property between the development sites and Comanche Trace, which I think will mitigate some of the, but that doesn't address traffic issues, the water issues, which I will again say that whatever is approved here goes to city council through 2 public hearings and approval. And then every step of that process is constrained by the traffic studies, the configuration of the road, and the water studies, which is going to mitigate some of this stuff. I have pretty substantial concerns about the change in the zoning from the notice. I would say that I think maybe we may not be required to provide a zoning map when these notices are sent out, but maybe it might be a good idea on a substantial, development like this that affects a lot of people to look in the future to maybe have that provided. But I would say if you don't provide that, when you send that public notice out, you need to have in big bold print any questions or anything that you need to know. We have the information in the development office. You can come by and get a look at the map or whatever, so people can have that opportunity.
And I received a handful of phone calls from folks that did get notified, and I sent them this drawing at their request.
Because I know that there was I don't remember who the lady was, but there was a lady that lives in Comanche Trace that requested the information. It was sent to her. She gave it to the Comanche Trace HOA director, and that was emailed out to every member of the HOA in Comanche Trace, this map. So you can see kind of what was, I think it was a couple of days ago, but I'm not gonna argue about it, about when it went out. But, it's a, we are limited to what we can do. I don't think that tabling this because of a perceived incorrect notice, which by the law was correct, is going to solve anybody's problem here. So what I think we need to do is we need to make a recommendation that's going to go to the city council, and then they're going to make the decisions. And I can tell you, my experience here is we've made recommendations before that they've just not followed, and we've made recommendations that have followed. So this is the 4-year-old step in a adult life where I have concerns about some of the things in here. My first concern is I'm very unhappy with the C3 zoning in the middle of a residential area. I don't think that fits. I tend to agree with Fred and some other people that I don't think that fits in with this area. I think that sticking the C3 zoning in there and allowing maximum commercial development is a huge mistake. I tend to wish there would have been some R1 zoning kept in there, but that doesn't mitigate much because you could have had R1 anywhere and you could have R2. I would like to make a recommendation that we approve this with the exception of the C3 and return that back to C2, which is neighborhood, type, what'd you call it, Drew? C2 is like neighborhood type?
Local commercial.
So the property that is at the front of Comanche Trace, is that C2?
It's not quite as clear because it's in the old planned development district, which references the previous zoning code. Off the top of my head, I want to say most of the uses would be comparable to a C2, but there may be some heavier uses. Again, it's going to be a blend.
Sure, sure.
Are you still taking questions, Mike?
Yes, sir. Only because it's you, Carl.
Oh, well, you're so nice. You brought up a good point. Comanche Trace was developed as planned development district. And it was, so if you think about it, it was done somewhat in stages. And that gave the property owners a chance to weigh in on each thing that has happened or come before it, unless I'm mistaken. And I think that might be a good idea, is to switch gears and go to a PDD.
Well, you know, where I might agree with you, Carl, it's just not, we have a question in front of us and we
I
have
know,
to-
you have a yes or no.
Well, we have a yes or no with modifications.
With modifications.
So, and I think that's where we're at.
Well, PDD would be a modification.
Well, that's,
We
Thank
don't
you.
have the information available for a planned development
sorry,
district.
we can't really,
I'm Harriet Warren, and I live on Dry Hollow. And I understand that perhaps some of this property is in the floodplain and construction could not occur there. Is that true?
yes.
And if that is true, can you point out on the map where that floodplain is?
Can you, I mean, I have it right here.
Chairman, actually, the only portion of the property that's in the FEMA floodplain is the Riverside parcel. There is,
Well, we're talking, it's not a floodplain, it's more of a
correct,
drainage.
so I'm making sure we're on the right,
It's a
correct
drainage
terminology.
easement, Harriet.
There is some drainage along this backside as it approaches Comanche Trace. But FEMA floodplain
Yeah.
would only be the Riverside
It's,
property.
it's two different things. I think what Harriet's talking about is the open space conception in this. and
Drainage
it-
is down along the
It's,
south
it's
side of the
all
property.
along the western boundary of Comanche Trace, where it abuts the Make property. And, I mean, it goes out a few hundred feet.
One additional thing, I know C3 has got our attention, but I don't want us to forget the R3 that's in there. R3 is still high density and high traffic, and also appreciates values across the road from it. And we're not just talking water and so forth, we're talking our investments. We all purchase that land at high dollar, and we're taxed fairly high versus per acre than most, because we are on the river and we do have that access. And I do not want apartments next to my house. There's a 3.3 acre there that's 3.39 acre lot there that I know a lot of people who say, I would love to be able to buy some property and build a house there. But, you know, I don't see rental property being put there. It's, you know, condos or something, but not apartments where you have transient people rather than homeowners.
From a zoning standpoint, multifamily and condos are the same land use, so both would require R3.
Another reason to zone it something else and make them ask for the right zoning when they wish to go forward.
And R2 is townhomes and duplexes?
Single-family, townhomes, and duplexes.
Which would probably be more appropriate for that property than. Anything else, guys? Kim, anything at all, any?
No, I feel like it's important for everybody to understand that, I mean, for all of us, and I've been in the middle of this as well over my lifetime, and change is hard, and growth is hard. But I think there's also a real opportunity here for desperately needed housing and jobs, and that is significant, I believe, to our city, so.
Ron, you got anything, bud? Anything more than what we?
Good.
Yeah,
I'm still,
thinking about it?
no, I mean, I've got thoughts and I've got things going through my head right now, but I still don't like the change in zoning. And you started to say something a while ago about C3 to C2. I like that thought. And I like the R3 to R2.
Do I?
Yeah, I think,
Anybody else?
I mean, it's gonna happen. I mean, it's.
No doubt about it,
And what we're doing tonight, we're not approving
Right.
the building. We're not
Right.
approving the building plans and what's gonna be put in there. All we're doing is we're approving the annexation and the zoning. Once that's approved, then they gotta come back to us, the developers, and Drew, correct me if I'm wrong, but they have to come back to us, and that's when we say yay or nay, right?
Plating and develop,
Yeah.
and, yeah.
Yeah, the plat would come back, but
Thanks, Gary.
not the land use, not the zoning.
Right, but the
You guys-
plat would come back.
Again, I hear your concerns. I've lived here longer than anybody, and I've watched Kerrville grow and change. As Ms. Richards responded, the city council several years ago did a housing study. We're 6,000 units short. We'll never catch up to that level, but we're gonna have to make changes. This is a great opportunity. Again, the discussions that I've had with the developer, it is not low rent for what the price of these properties are. This is going to be very nice, very substantial. The C3 gives them the flexibility they need if they do want to put a small grocery store or something into that area. I don't know that that's what they're going to do. But if you start limiting it at this stage, it's going to limit them what they can do from a developmental stage. I would encourage you to pass it the way that we've requested it. When they get to the city and come back with their specific designations, if the council doesn't like that, then they can make those changes at that point in time. Thank you.
Anything else? Kevin, you got anything at all?
No, I'm good with it.
I understand what you're saying, Gary. I understand this is just me. I'm just expressing my opinion, and then we'll get a motion. It's not, to me, it's part of it is the neighborhoods, and part of it is the people, and a big part of it is, unfortunately, the access on and off 173 from pretty heavy development. And I think that's a problem. Personally, I think it's a problem. I don't know how that gets mitigated down the road, whether you widen the road, you put turn lanes in, which I expect would probably have to be done, but I'm not a big fan of sticking an R3 designation in between two residential houses. I think that's a huge mistake. I think that's not fair to the property owners. I think it does have an effect on their values. And I certainly am not in favor of a C3 designation right there on the highway again, right across the street from a substantial residential development that allows, and whatever the intentions of the developer is, that allows, like Al said, once you open that door, you don't have a say on what they do. My recommendation would be to approve the annexation and to approve the zoning request with the exception of the R3 on the riverside and changing that to R2, which would be more in line with the residentials over there, and taking the C3 and taking to a C2, which limits the commercial development. I think that's a commercial type. I know I live in Comanche Trace, and I know that there's been several designs and plans to do some commercial in front of Comanche Trace, and I don't know that I could, be in favor of one and not be in favor of the other, but I do think C3 is too intense for that area. So
I'm gonna make a motion to approve as it is.
I'll second you, Kevin.
we have a motion to approve that is. All in favor? All opposed? That motion fails. Can I get another motion, or does anyone have a motion they want to present?
I'll make a motion as you presented it, Mike. I'd go to approve it as it is, but change the C3 to C2 and the R3 across 173 to R2.
So we have a motion to approve the annexation and the zoning, limiting the, changing the R3 on the riverside to R2, and changing the C3 on the front property to C2. Do I have?
Second.
We have a second. I have a motion and a second. All in favor? All opposed? So this motion passes. There is our recommendation to the city council is what we've expressed, and guarantee you that you will get ample opportunity through 2 public hearings to go home and do your homework and bring your questions and concerns to those public hearings.
Did have one question, just to clarify the motion. The C3 was for the front portion,
Yes.
Correct.
Change that to C2.
and the hilltop is still C3?
Not concerned about the
One word.
hilltop.
Okay.
I'm sorry, Drew. Yeah, front portion C2.
Or, yes, front portion C3 down to C2.
Yes, sir.
The hilltop leaving it at
Leave it at
C3.
C3.
Okay. Okay, thank you very much.
That clarification is, are you still taking, you made a comment, can the public still make a comment?
We're done, really.
Case is done.
Carl, I
He was
mean,
about what he just said.
go ahead.
Your motion did not address the hilltop.
Correct.
No,
So.
I like that at C3.
it's,
It's not my position, but.
it's
I think
it's
it
5.5
should be-
acres, so.
It should be addressed. You know, a blaring honky-tonk on top of the hill right there would affect a good part of it.
Well, you have to understand though, Carl, these people are only gonna make money if they can do residential development and sell it, and they're not gonna be selling residential development in there when there's some nuisance at the top
Well,
of the hill.
it's a big question why you would put commercial that far away from.
I think, I'm thinking it's like what Comanche Trace did, Carl. It's the top of the hill, nice place for a
A
restaurant.
restaurant would not be C3, that would be C2.
Well, we're done. We've
Case is,
done.
case is closed. We'll present that to city council.
Yes. Staff report?
So we have a discussion of some proposed amendments or potential amendments to Chapter 82, the subdivision code. As staff have been working with several projects through the subdivision process, came aware of a couple issues or process things that we want to review with the committee, with the commission, excuse me. After this discussion, we'll go back, redraft it, and bring it forward with public hearing, because it is part of the subdivision ordinance, and on to city council. This is just open dialogue, open discussion, but wanted to give you guys a little bit of history and then dive in and see, kind of get some feedback from y'all. So wanted to review the sequence of plating, just so you guys are familiar with some of the different processes we've gone through. Talk about delayed infrastructure requirements, when a project is recording the plat prior to installing the infrastructure, which is an option in the code. And then some potential changes and kind of direction from the commission. Sorry, Martin, I keep stealing the mouse. So our standard sequencing for plats, we start with the adequate facilities plan, which is approved at the staff level. Many times that is included with the preliminary plat. And so when we bring preliminary plats to the commission for approval, sometimes we'll have that adequate facilities plan concurrent with the plat. Sometimes we'll actually have reviewed the plat prior to, or the adequate facilities plan prior to the preliminary plat. Just to remind you, the adequate facilities plan is more of a conceptual utility plan. They haven't finished design, but they've identified what utility connections they're going to make and where they're taking those utilities. Then we go into civil construction plans. Those are approved by engineering staff. The final plat, as you know, comes back to the Planning and Zoning Commission to make sure it's consistent with all those steps above. Then the developer will install the infrastructure, construct the roads and install water and sewer mains, and then we'll record the plat. In cases where the developer has requested to delay the infrastructure, those, you notice those bottom two flip order. So we go through the adequate facilities plan, preliminary plat, civil construction plans, final plat. They'll record the plat once they've posted financial guarantee for that infrastructure, and then they go build. We hold that financial guarantee until the project is complete. Once it's complete, they get that, whether it's an escrow, letter of credit, or a bond, they get that financial guarantee back upon the completion of the construction. That way the city can guarantee that for those recorded lots this developer's working on, will have the proper infrastructure, is the intent of that. And we have had a few projects kind of do a hybrid of the two, if you will. Go to final plat with the Planning Commission, start their infrastructure, and as they get close to completion, record the plat early with a financial guarantee for a portion of that, and then they complete their construction after the recording of the plat. And what we've seen is typically they start selling those lots off as they're finishing their last 20% of the construction project or so, as an example. Currently have one of the phases of Comanche Trace. Sewer mains are in, the road is in, they have a water line to build. So they've actually already, or they're in the process of getting that plat recorded. And they'll provide financial guarantee for the water line. And so then they can start going under contract on those lots to sell them to builders and homeowners as they're finishing their infrastructure. So some of the roadblocks that we've hit on a couple of projects, current code for a project to delay the infrastructure, at the time of application for the final plat, they have to already have their civil plans approved, sign the improvement agreement, which is that contract agreement with the city on how they're going to get the infrastructure installed, and provide and post the financial guarantee before they even get to the Planning Commission. The most recent project, the feedback we got was that it's difficult for the developer to put up the money for that infrastructure before P&Z's ever seen it, much less the city's sitting on that money for 30-plus days while they're waiting for their contractors to mobilize and so on. So they could have money sitting in letter of credit or an escrow account at the bank for 30, 60, 90 days before they ever start construction and have recorded the plat. One of the projects we recently looked at their platting on, their final plat, got a waiver from City Council from this provision specifically to sign the improvement agreement, come to P&Z for approval of the plat. Before we record the plat, they'll fund that escrow agreement. But that saved them, say so far, we're looking at 60 days already that they have not had to have that money out of pocket. So one of the recommendations we're making is to move those requirements until prior to recording, after the Planning Commission has actually approved the plat. Because obviously those items don't change the face of the plat, doesn't change the layout of the subdivision. Your purview is, does the plat meet the subdivision code? Obviously we do have that one piece of, do we have adequate infrastructure in place? That's where those other pieces fall in, either they build it or go through the improvement agreement process. So now that's kind of a lot pretty fast. Does that still make sense?
Yeah, on the proposed amendment, they really can't do anything until the plat is recorded.
That's correct. And staff would not record the plat until they've either completed the construction or improvement agreement and the money is in place.
Right.
And then to muddy the waters one more level, we've had, again, a couple different projects come through that process a couple different ways. We did have one that delayed all infrastructure, and that one was a single lot development. So that's fairly simple to control, because we know we have one developer, one lot, one construction project. We've had another one, again, that installed most of the utilities. Excuse me, my slide says delayed road construction. Comanche Trace example, they installed sewer in the road, they're waiting on water. So 2 of the 3 are in, 2 are the big 3. The purpose for them is to start selling lots early. And so kind of wanted to talk through that with the commission to understand that.
Which they can't do until the plat's recorded?
That's correct.
Yes.
I know there have been some developments that have gone into contract for proposed lots. I don't know if there's any realtors left on the board that can correct me, but as far as I know, they can go under contract on a proposed lot. They can't close until it's platted.
Correct, they can go under contract, yes.
Yeah, so there have been some other ways developments have worked around these issues to be able to start getting sales. But the recent request that we have gotten is they actually would like to close on those lots and then complete construction. So kind of just from the staff level, our comfort, if they're gonna start selling lots, we don't wanna have all infrastructure pending. Because we certainly don't want a phase of 50 home sites and have 50 homeowners coming to pull building permits and we can't issue a permit because there's no water, sewer in the road because the developer hasn't finished. So for the multiple lot subdivision, our recommendation would be either limit it to underground utilities completed and the road construction pending, or an 80-20 split, something along those lines where we know how far we are, we're substantially completed, and then they can move forward. On the single lot projects, we have a lot less heartburn with that because we're limited control. We've got one lot, one developer. Even if it sells, we're still dealing with one person.
Drew, kind of the one you're talking about right now is the new project out on 16.
Mm-hmm. That's correct. Yeah, the multifamily there on 16 and Camp Meeting Road and call it Wellborn Way is what they platted it as.
I mean, I sat through council on that, so I like your thought and what you're talking about doing, because if there are multi-lots, they do want to close on it. Well, they want to get some of their capital back, some of their operating budget back.
That's what Comanche wanted.
And I think to go forward and do something like that, have one of two. And you can't have roads in if you don't have your underground utilities in. So I would say infrastructure of your underground utilities would be primarily first.
Right.
Then sell, close, and they might have to put a stipulation in their contract that you can't start construction until everything's finished.
And that was specific to the Comanche Trace phase. That was part of our improvement agreement.
Okay.
That they have to notify the buyers that this agreement's in place. They're buying a lot without, in this case, a water line.
And I might be putting the cart before the horse, but Mike, can they legally do that on a real estate contract? And I know you're not a real estate guy, but could they sell it and say you can't start construction until everything's done?
We need Mr. Richards here. I was just thinking, one of the things that we'll need to do is check with a title company for sure. I think as long as you disclose it and it's in there that you're buying basically a substandard lot because you're not going to be able to pull a permit from the city. There's a promise out there, right?
And not just on the legal side, on the code side, we wouldn't issue a permit that doesn't have water or access. So there's still.
As long as we're protected, and the city's protected, is what our main concern.
You're right. I mean, the city, there's two people I'm concerned about is the buyer, because if the deal goes south and the developer goes away without putting in X, Y, or Z, they're gonna be at our front step asking, I bought a lot in the city, why didn't I have utilities? And then the second part is, and then hopefully, there's always risk, right? And so, bonds, cash is certainly better than bonds, and a letter of credit is certainly better than a bond. But anytime you then have to go to a third party and say, hey, you need to make us whole because the developer, we can't get a hold of them, there's risk there. So we just have to nail all this down into writing, and then obviously then make sure that we hold these developers' feet to the fire in terms of if they want plat approval before infrastructure's put in.
Thank you.
To go a little further on the financial side, as Mike mentioned, the bond is our third request. Letter of credit certainly has its viability, but getting the money, there's a lot to prove. The example with the Creekside Apartments, it's if I get the terminology right, it's a tri-party escrow agreement. The city is named on that account as kind of secondary. They are able to draw down on that account because that is their money. So as they can go through phases of completion, they'll be paying their contractors out of that account. If they disappear off to Mexico and never come back, the city can then withdraw from the account to finish the project.
And if I remember correct, during that meeting, it was kind of set up as basically a construction draw.
Correct.
That y'all would have final say-so
That's
on
right.
completion to authorize the draw to be done.
Yeah, our engineering staff, for any infrastructure project, our engineering staff are inspecting. They're on the job site daily with the contractor. As they sign off on those phases of completion,
Then y'all
as
go out
the
and
developer
inspect.
requests for X percentage of payment, engineering department says, yes, they have met that percentage. We're on the same page, we're on the same phase, and they'll release the funds. So that would be our recommendation, is to move to that escrow account. Again, that's cash account, but it's the cash they get to spend. So we're not holding the project cash over here and they have to spend their own capital over here. But it allows both parties to have access to it should something go awry. But, and I think to your other point, our recommendation would be underground utilities for when there are selling lots. The Comanche Trace example was kind of a one-off, and we may figure out how to put that into code, but the road's in place already for this phase. It's right off of Comanche Trace Boulevard, or is it?
Comanche Trace Boulevard in the back, yes.
So they installed the new sewer line. The water line's actually gonna be installed behind the homes from the golf course side. So the road.
What water?
Yeah, and that's one of the few. It's very rare, to your point, most of the time water and sewer are within the right of way.
You have a
under
pretty
pavement.
substantial difference there because you have an owner that has a huge investment.
Right, yeah, so we may have to figure out a way to put that in the code for
Right.
some kind of I would keep using that term, a waiver process, where we have one that's one-off, where this still makes sense, come back to,
Variance just for.
yeah, P and Z or council or some extent there to make sure we've got some relief, but
Well, I was excited about the escrow when I heard it during the deal because it just protects everybody.
Another thing on the financial guarantee, our current code says that they have to fund it at 110% of estimated cost. Doing some research around the state, we may be recommending 125. I've seen some agreements up to 150%. I imagine somewhere there's a threshold where they're just not going to do it. We certainly aren't intending to reach that threshold. But I know Kyle can attest, when we go out for bid, it's much cheaper than if any of you go out for bid. Or excuse me, much more expensive than if you go out for bid. So even if we bid the same project, the contractor bids are gonna come back more expensive, and we just hope that 25% covers that gap.
The bonds, you just feel like the bonding companies won't stand behind those bonds anymore? I mean, our bonding company said the other day that development bonds are getting harder and harder to get, and they don't wanna write them anymore.
I don't have any experience, I've never had to try to cash a bond. But my understanding is getting through the process to actually receive the money almost ends up in more litigation than the funds we're talking about.
Yep.
So.
Can you just eliminate that option?
The way the current code is written is it is staff policy on what option we choose. We do want to write in that drawdown escrow is an option, because that's not currently listed in the code. But that is at the staff level for approval. So our preference will be the escrow. If we can't get to an agreement there, we may look at a letter of credit. I don't know that we would look at bonding unless it's just absolute, the only option. You what? Anything else?
What is staff's recommendation? Bond, or, excuse me, escrow?
So far, it's escrow, unless this one example we have doesn't work well, we may change our mind, but, and again, to my knowledge, we've never cashed out on a letter of credit or a bond for a plat. I don't know of any, do you?
Not that we've cashed out.
So, I don't know that, and it's always the insurance policy, it's in case something goes wrong. At least in recent history, we haven't had a project do that. But we do want to make sure we're mitigating that risk for the city and the citizens, in case something does go sideways with the developer and contractor and so on. Any other questions? If not, we'll bring this back at a future, I don't know if it'll be on May or June agenda. Hopefully we got final draft language and we'll present that and go through that process.
Sounds like a plan.
Sounds good.
Anything else?
That's it.
All
Next
right.
meeting, one more thing. Next meeting, remember it is kind of an off date. It's not the first Thursday, so May 11th is our next meeting.
11th.
And that is it.
Is it still a Thursday?
It is a Thursday, just the following.
It's the week after the Memorial Day weekend or some holiday or
Week
something.
after the election.
Election, that's right. That's what it is. All right, we're adjourned. 5:31.